Well, it seems that we can learn from our mistakes. Some even say that it's only by messing up that we can really learn things. So this video is for everyone who wants to improve their cutting techniques. Because today, we're going to see how to stack the odds in your favor to make sure you completely fail all your cuttings. Come on, grab your old knives and dirtiest pruning shears, no need to clean them. Let's get started. Not all plants are equally easy to grow from cuttings. So, first tip, if you're just starting out and you want to make sure you fail, avoid starting with willows, goji berries, knotweed like this perennial coriander, jostaberry, pepino, comfrey, mint, or even tomato. These plants are so easy to grow from cuttings that you might get overconfident and risk missing out on learning from failures. We want to avoid that, right? Instead of that, try starting by taking cuttings from apple trees, pear trees, or other fruit trees. These plants are so difficult to propagate from cuttings that you're almost certain to fail. That's why these plants are usually grafted, not grown from cuttings. The time when you take cuttings also matters. There are many different types of cuttings, and for each type, there's a period that's more suitable for doing them. So here, the advice could be, don't overthink it, just do whatever, whenever. Honestly, it's going to be pretty hard to mess up in this case. Since you'll choose the type of cutting to do based on the availability of the part you want to propagate, for example, for small fruits like black currants, red currants, jostaberries, even grapevines, we often take cuttings from stems that don't have any leaves, and you'll find these stems in winter, so that's when you'll do it, and it would be impossible to find these stems at any other time. For what we call green cuttings, you'll do them on stems that are still green, and you'll only find these stems in the spring. For semi-hardwood cuttings or summer cuttings, you'll do them on woody stems, and you'll only be able to do this in the summer. By the way, our taste comes from the month of August, and summer cuttings, well, we know it's in the summer that we'll have to find them. So it will be very hard for you to miss, since the parts you need to take cuttings from can only be found when it's time to take the cuttings. So there you go, you can't go wrong with that. Well, on the other hand, here we might find another way to mess up. Some plants can be propagated in different ways at different times, goji, verbena for example. We can take cuttings from woody stems that don't have leaves in winter. We can take cuttings from green wood in spring or from more woody stems in summer. So, the advice I can give you here is to try all the methods and actually try all these methods on lots of different plants. And by doing all that, well, there's a good chance you'll manage to fail a few cuttings. And above all, from there, make sure to note or remember the techniques and the timing. Knowing which plants it worked on and which it didn't will help you improve. The worst is not trying out of fear, since that's the easiest way to learn nothing. So how do we proceed? We've seen that you don't just take cuttings any old way from any part of the plant. So now, let's look at a few tips that can help you be sure. Now, one of the most classic types of cuttings. It's going to be on a plant. We're going to cut a stem and make that stem produce roots with the goal of creating a new plant. So, while roots can appear pretty much anywhere on the stem, the new stems and new leaves will come out at the buds. So, when you take a cutting, there needs to be at least one bud. And it's even better if there are several buds on the stem you're going to cut. And if you don't know where the buds are on the stem, the important thing to remember is that the buds are located at the nodes. And where the nodes are, that's where the leaves are attached. And by the way, when you cut a stem like this, it's often recommended to cut the stem just below a node, as it increases the chances of success. Here, I have a node right here. I'm going to cut just below the node. And so, a little tip in passing, if you want to make sure you fail, make a cutting where you cut above the node. A piece of stem without a node, that's guaranteed failure. A piece of stem without a node will never produce a plant. Here's another little thing to know about how plants work that could help you really fail your cuttings in a plant. There are different types of sap that circulate among these saps. For example, there's raw sap, which is pumped from the soil by the roots, goes up the stem and reaches the leaves. This circulation happens thanks to the leaves, which evaporate water. There are small holes on the leaves that let water evaporate. This creates suction, and that suction causes water to enter through the roots. At the level of the roots, a small transformation takes place. This means that the composition of the raw sap is still slightly different from the water that is pumped up. Imagine what happens if you make this cut but leave the leaves on. The leaves will keep doing their job, they'll evaporate water, so this will create a small suction effect, and it will make the sap rise in the stem. On the other end, there are no roots to turn water from the substrate into raw sap. What enters the stem isn't really raw sap anymore, it's just water, and the plant doesn't like that. So that's why it's often recommended when making this kind of cutting, not to remove all the leaves, but to reduce the amount. So you remove the lower leaves and the upper leaves, you cut them in half or a little more. By doing this, we reduce the evaporation surface and therefore reduce the suction effect in the stem, increasing the success rate. So the advice I can give you is that next time you do this kind of cutting, make a lot of them. Make 2 different batches. In one batch you reduce the amount of foliage, and in the other batch you leave all the leaves. And you'll see which ones do better, but normally the ones with a lot of leaves don't do as well. Alright, now if your thing is cutting, start with cuttings that are easy to succeed with. Maybe don't start with this type of cutting, but rather with plants that can be propagated by roots or rhizomes. There normally it's much harder to mess up. The technique is simple. You take a piece of root or a piece of rhizome, put it in moist soil, and that's it. Normally there shouldn't be any problem. It takes root then. Root cuttings can be done with Paulownia or comfrey, for example. This type of cutting can be done pretty much at any time, but it works better if you do it from early spring to late autumn when the plant is growing. So, if you want to mess up, try taking cuttings at the beginning of winter when the plant goes dormant. There you go, doing it like that, maybe there's a chance it won't work, but again, with these plants that root really well, I think even then it could still work. And for cuttings on rhizomes, you can do that with mints, irises, daylilies, and on the Chinese pepper plant like this one. Rhizomes are the little underground stems you see here. With this, it's really hard to mess up. So, when you see these little stems growing, it's the same thing. It should be done from early spring to late fall while the plant is growing. There you go. You take a piece of rhizome. Here there's a bit of stem attached, but let's take a piece of rhizome without any stem on it. These pieces of rhizome here. You put them in a pot with moist soil, no problem, it should take root, and it works even better if you use a piece of rhizome with leaves on it. At this stage, it's less about cuttings and more about dividing the clump. It's almost foolproof. Alright, I'm getting off track here. The topic of the video was failures, so let's get back to the different ways you can fail. For most cuttings, you'll need tools, knives, scissors, pruners, and generally you'll be advised to have tools that are as clean and as sharp as possible. So, if you really want to minimize your chances of success, then definitely don't do that. Don't sharpen your knives and don't disinfect any of your tools. Here, you can even take failure beyond the success of your cuttings. For example, if you're taking cuttings from plants that are susceptible to diseases, viruses, bacteria or fungi, if you forget to disinfect your tools, you'll end up with sick plants. But especially if you take cuttings from different varieties of the same plant species and you don't disinfect your tools properly, all it takes is for one variety to have a disease for you to spread it to all the others. Well, on the other hand, if you do that, there's a good chance you won't be welcome at any of your gardener friends' places anymore, starting with me. Another little tip, while we're talking about tools, if you want to disinfect your tools but still want to do it badly, rather than using strong alcohol to disinfect your tools, use a flame, lighter or blowtorch. This will ruin your blades, but at least they'll be sterile. Now you've made your cutting. Whether it's a piece of root, a piece of rhizome, a piece of stem, with or without its leaves, you'll need to do something with it until that piece of plant grows roots. Here, the best way to fail is simply to leave that stem sitting on your work table in full sunlight. And there you go. So in that case, failure is guaranteed. More seriously, another way, a bit random for plants that aren't too fussy, is to put them directly in water. So this works for fairly vigorous plants like here for osier. For osier it works really well. It can also work for joster berries, but for other plants that are a bit less vigorous, you'll still need a different method to rot your cuttings, as this isn't the best way. So for most of the classic cutting methods, we're going to avoid water and use a substrate, but just like with the tools, we'll try to use a substrate that's clean and relatively sterile. Well, on the other hand, for potting soil or any substrate, we can't put alcohol in the soil, although watering your cuttings with alcohol would probably be a good way to fail as well, more seriously. If you want to use a substrate but are worried about rooting your cuttings, avoid using clean potting soil, fresh out of the bag. Instead, use some old nasty soil that's been lying around. Or even worse, take some soil from a geranium that died because you overwatered it or something like that. Another effective way to really mess things up would be to skip the potting soil altogether and just use some garden dirt, which isn't made for cuttings at all. Well, as long as the soil is wet. Once you've made your cutting and it's in its pot, you'll need to water it or maybe even soak it in water for about 10 minutes so the soil gets thoroughly moist. In general, I prefer soaking. Depending on the plant and the type of cutting you've chosen to make, the roots will take more or less time to appear. So, what you'll need to do is make sure the soil stays nice and moist. A good way to mess up at this stage is to forget to check the moisture of the substrate and let the soil dry out. When the roots are just starting to appear and are still very fragile, moisture stimulates root production, and if the substrate dries out, well, it dies very quickly. So here are two methods to increase your failure rate. Once the cutting is done, it's in its pot, and it's been well watered, you could place it in a mini greenhouse. That's too big. That and this mini greenhouse would have two advantages. By maintaining a high level of humidity, it will already prevent the substrate from drying out, so we'll need to water it less. Maybe, or not really, it's very humid inside. The other thing is that thanks to this high humidity, it would prevent the leaves from evaporating water and therefore from drawing water up through the stem. And so to avoid all that, definitely don't use a mini greenhouse. Put your cuttings in the warmest and driest place you have. If it's a place with wind, that's even better. That way you're really giving yourself every chance for it not to work. And that's not all, there's a way to do even worse than that. Suppose you've done everything correctly so far. Even if you chose nice stems, remove the extra leaves so they don't evaporate too much water and so water doesn't rise up into the stems. You used a clean substrate, you moistened it well, and even if you used a greenhouse like this one, even then there's still a way to mess up or, well, to fail, right? And then all you have to do is leave this mini greenhouse in the sunniest spot in your garden and forget about it for a few days. From there, no stress. Normally, it's impossible for it to work. If you had kept it in the shade, it would have been perfect, but in full sun, it's almost guaranteed to fail. So, you should now know how to fail nearly all your cuttings. Well, don't say thank you. Above all, well, I hope this video will allow you to experience plenty of failures, and that thanks to that, you'll still be able to learn quite a few interesting things. There you go. If you like this video, well, you can say so in the comments, like and subscribe. And if you have gardener friends who have a green thumb and act a little too clever, well, you can share this video with them. Alright, as usual, I'll also put the little link to Tiffy there. If you want to support me and help me keep telling you lots of nonsense in videos, go ahead, thank you all. And now I'm going back to make some real cuttings.